David. David.
He's falling in a beautiful swirling pattern.
David.
Hello everyone, I am David Wells and this is a David Wells experiment. So I was doing another podcast episode and I started a chat with a friend who I don't hear from much that often. So that was nice. So I ended the podcast a little earlier. I'm back though and yup. Oh, funny thing that happened which we're talking about, which I'm seeing a lot about these days. Apparently, it's only been a couple days, maybe a week, but out of nowhere, Mark Zuckerberg unleashed a competitor to Twitter called Threads, and it's become huge. Some people see it as an alternate Twitter, and they've migrated over there. I have a Twitter account, but I'm really hardly ever on it. And I wonder if I want to go through the trouble of signing up on Threads. I wouldn't be surprised if whoever has an Instagram or Facebook account, they'll get one automatically. Because I know they probably want this thing to be a success. And some people who have not been fans of how Elon has done things on Twitter, they've migrated over there. So, yeah, there's that. One thing I would be very interested to see is a competitor to YouTube. Because I know when YouTube started out, there were a lot of video sharing platforms, but none of them stuck around and had quite the impact that YouTube did. Ironically, I kind of think that Spotify might potentially give YouTube a run for their money because, as I've mentioned before, I uploaded a video podcast to Spotify, and I was pleased with the process. One of the things that I'm pleased with is the fact that they don't just arbitrarily darken the image. If I want to post anything on YouTube, I have to make a version that's brighter so that when YouTube does what it does, it doesn't look all off-putting. But anyway, so getting back to what I was wanting to talk about in the last podcast. So there's a famous filmmaker, if you're an anime nerd, you probably know who he is. His name is Hideaki Anno, and he directed Neon Genesis Evangelion, and he animated a very famous sequence in Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Anyway, he did animation for a while, and in the late 90s, he started to experiment with live action, but rather than get a big, huge film crew like a lot of people did at the time, he went the opposite route, and he got a small little mini DV camcorder, and he made this movie called Love and Pop, and that movie, I haven't seen all of it, but from the little bit that I have seen, the camera work is bonkers. Because he's cutting there'll be moments where he's cutting every couple seconds and from every conceivable weird angle. I guess after the sort of hurry up and wait nature of animation, he let his creativity go wild, and you can see that, and he loved it. And I think he's done some other films that way. As a filmmaker, he matured, um, because recently there have been these movie Toho has released these things called the Shin series of tokusatsu films, and they include Godzilla, Ultraman, and Kamen Rider. And I believe that he's directed each one of those. The Godzilla one, which I haven't seen, I've seen bits and pieces, but I haven't seen the full thing all through. It is probably like the most Godzilla movie since like the first one, all the way back from the 50s. Like the one from the 50s, it's so unique. It feels more like a real world occurrence. Like obviously a giant lizard coming out of the ocean and attacking. That's so fantastical. But the original one was supposed to be an allegory akin to the atomic bomb. It was supposed to be about a disaster, and like, yeah, it was. I still to this day have only seen like the American. When it was brought over to the US, they filmed some extra footage and kind of changed the story a bit. But yeah, even that version, it has more echoes of a real world occurrence rather than, some of the more fantastical elements of the other films. Like, when they started to do all these sequels, it really became about, okay, which monster is Godzilla going to fight against? And they got really goofy up until like the 80s when they tried to make them darker. And then in 98 we got the American version, which it kind of tried to, well, they tried to make it Godzilla for American audiences, but it's an enjoyable film. But there was some criticism that they tried to make Godzilla an understandable character, like one that, whereas I think in the Japanese versions, like he's always been sort of like a force of nature. There's no controlling him or containing him. You just have to reconcile yourself to live with, like, okay, this is a fact we have to deal with. I think there were a couple of other Godzilla movies done in like the early 2000s, but then they made a plan to not do anything with the character for like another 10 years. And then there was another American Godzilla remake that was done in like 2014. That one was much better received because he looked more like Godzilla. And also in 2014 was when Hideaki Anno got to do his take of the character. So it's really interesting. Like, you see echoes of the bombs for Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and more recently the earthquake incident of 2011, which that was just a couple years, separated from when that movie came out. And I feel and again, I've only seen bits and pieces of it, but what I feel that movie really gets is just Godzilla being sort of an intrusion and a disruption upon the presumed order of society and daily life. And I kind of feel like that's a thing I'm really blessed that I live in Texas because I feel like we don't have a lot of natural disasters. We get some really bad storms every now and then, but I've been blessed to have lived in areas that have never faced any hard repercussions. It's one of those things like where whenever we do go through something extreme, people always like to mention like, "Oh man, this is the worst it's ever been." But I've lived long enough to know like, am I just viewing the past through, you know, everything is enhanced because you have to, the farther you reach back, maybe you have to enhance things to remember them, or were they really that way? Because I remember in 2012 or 2011, somewhere around that time, there was some really bad rain, and there was flooding, and I remember firefighters had to go around and help people out. I also remember in 2006, like the roads got iced over. Yeah. So, also, supposedly it's like the weather has been the hottest it's ever been in recorded history. But I remember in 2009 it being really, really hot. Like it got really hot in February of that year and didn't cool down until like September. But anyway, yeah, so I've heard that it's like the best Godzilla movie since the first one. It's kind of a shame that, well, I don't know if it's a shame, but maybe it's inevitable. Like, the first Godzilla movie was this commentary about this traumatizing, like, natural disaster. Well, not natural disaster, but it was basically on par with a natural disaster. Like, this traumatizing national event. And you've got to wonder, I mean, how could they keep doing that? Maybe the Godzilla movies had to evolve into these sort of like popcorn spectacle flicks. And I mean, I guess it has to happen. Like every now and then they'll make one that taps into what the first one was all about. And then it becomes sort of bread and circus. But going back to Hideaki Anno and Love and Pop, it's one of those things where it's like you make this sort of high energy run and gun film, and it just makes me go back to that point I've made in my recent podcast where even just thinking about it, you think, I've got to make a film, I've got to do something. And that's a conviction I keep coming back to. For right now, it seems the only thing I can do is make a podcast. And maybe I'll do an audio drama. But I just feel compelled to make. I have to keep doing things. And hopefully I'll build up enough momentum to where I can get the band back together and rally the troops. So anyway, this has been the David Wells Experiment. I'm your host, David Wells, and as I say all the time, have an absolutely super day. Bye.